The European Union is currently going through a new and very deep crisis that has been caused by the coronavirus epidemic. It's a crisis that is a crisis of health and health systems, but also fundamentally a crisis of economic, social, and political institutions in Europe. The last 10 years in Europe, and in the European Union in particular, have been difficult. In 2010, a huge crisis hit the continent, a crisis that pivoted on the common currency. The Eurozone was racked by this crisis for 3 years, until about 2013 at its worst, and then survived. But it survived after policies had been put in place that imposed the cost of the crisis on working people in a very severe way, hitting incomes, employment, and so on, and also by imposing the cost of the crisis on the weakest countries of the Union, particularly the countries of the periphery, Greece, Portugal, and of course, Spain. In any case, the Union survived and the Eurozone survived, and it continued to function for a few years after the crisis, but its functioning was deeply problematic. These were years in which growth was not very strong, inequality grew dramatically, incomes did not rise, production was not dynamic. This was a kind of capitalism in Europe that was not really going anywhere, and it was falling behind the United States, China, and other parts of the world economy. During that period, it became very clear that the European Union is not what its original designers and planners wanted it to be, and it's not what those who believe in a transcendental Europe continue to say that it is. It's not really an alliance of partner states who support each other and make sure that there is convergence of the poorest towards the richest. None of this is true. It became very clear that the European Union is a neoliberal totality of institutions that serves the interests of big business and big banks in the first place, and serves the interests of powerful countries against weaker countries. It is a totality split into core and periphery. And the periphery, to which Spain obviously belongs, has paid the price of keeping the Union together. This neoliberal entity, this neoliberal totality, has also very clearly seen to be undemocratic, run in the interest of a small elite, and bypassing the popular will at every turn, making sure that democracy has got very little content, very little meaning as far as economic policy in particular is concerned, but policy more generally. The coronavirus shock has come at a terrible moment, a very weak moment for the Union. It has hit it at a moment of great weakness, and that's why the crisis is so severe right now. The shock of the pandemic has made three things very clear. First of all, despite all the frequent talk about what so-called Europe is about, there is very little solidarity among member states. In fact, on coronavirus, there is next to no solidarity. What has emerged very clearly is that every state must act for itself, and every country must act for itself to protect its society, to protect the weaker members, and to defend its fundamental interests. This is what's happening in practice in Europe. Very little solidarity, next to nothing. Each country, each nation state for itself. The return of the nation state, which actually had never gone away, but the obvious return of it is on the agenda right now. In addition to that, the institutions of the European Union, in the course of this crisis, are looking again increasingly weak. And that holds fundamentally for the Eurozone, which is again under threat because of the inability of countries to spend what they need to spend and because of the accumulation of debt. In other words, Europe has created a common currency in order to support its European Union, a currency which is a problem for the European Union and not a solution to anything. It is a problem that appears at every turn and at every critical moment. Now, that's what we're faced with. That's where we are. And it is in this context that I think that this book of mine, which has appeared in Catalan and has been fairly well read in Catalonia and elsewhere, I think is quite significant for understanding the current crisis. It is quite significant because it will tell you in clear terms why neoliberalism has become so powerful in Europe, what are the mechanisms through which it has become established, how is it is promoted, how does it serve the interests of big business and big banks, what, in other words, is the reality of the European Union. It will also tell you how core and periphery have emerged and how hegemony is the name of the game in Europe, with a hegemonic power sitting at the top above all others, Germany in particular, drawing strength through the European Union itself and serving the interests of its own elite, its own capitalist class. My book will also tell you why democracy has lost content in Europe, in the European Union. It's become a meaningless word for large numbers of working people who very frequently don't even bother to vote. So for all these reasons, I think that it is a significant contribution to understanding the current crisis and to understanding what to do today. And what is it that we've got to do today in Europe? Well, as I've already indicated, as I've already mentioned, the key issue here is to realize that there will be very little solidarity from the European Union, despite all the talk that will come from the bureaucrats in Brussels and from those who have a vested interests in defending the current state of affairs in Europe. The key issue for working people and for socialists in each country in the European Union right now is to defend the interests of workers, to defend the interests of wage labor, to protect employment, to defend incomes, to boost demand, and to make sure that economies continue to function and ordinary people don't pay the price of this shock. That's the first thing that has to happen. The second thing that has to happen in the fullness of time is that intervention must take place on the side of production, on the side of supply. There have to be measures put in place to nationalize key industries, to take over and under public command banks and other major points of production, major units of production to serve public interests. And these have to be combined with communal and other associational forms of organization which will localize production again and make sure that it serves the interests of communities and of working people in Europe, not of big business and big banks. Action needs to take place, which basically reverses the madness of globalization and financialization that we've been living through the last few decades, and which in Europe have found the most adequate expression in the European Union. The time has come to take action from below and to begin to defend the interests of working people and the great masses of people in each country. That's why hopefully this book of mine will be of use to those of you who will read it.